Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the rickety wooden bowels of an Elizabethan theater. It's hot, it's loud, and the smell? Well, let's just say your nostrils are going to want hazard pay. You're pacing nervously backstage, wearing 5 layers of wool in July, and trying very hard not to let the mutton pie you ate for lunch make a surprise cameo. The audience is rowdy. The floorboards creak like old knees, and you've never felt more pressure, both emotionally and gastrointestinally. Yes, tonight, we're drifting gently into a lesser-known corner of performance history. How Elizabethan actors dealt with the all-too-human problem of stage farts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this from somewhere unusual, let me know in the comments. Tell me your location and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing backstage at the Globe Theater, waiting for your cue. Through a gap in the curtain, you can see the audience packed like sardines. The groundlings, those who paid a penny to stand, are already sweating and drinking. You're already sweating and not drinking, but for an entirely different reason. Because despite hours of rehearsal, the speech you are about to deliver, an impassioned soliloquy about honor and fate, may be forever remembered not for your eloquence, but for the tiny, traitorous sound that escapes your person mid-line. The pressure is real. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, feeling the stiff inner seams of your costume pull and tug in unflattering ways. Your codpiece is more decorative than practical, and the lacing across your stomach presses gently against the regrettable dinner you had 2 hours ago. A greasy mix of cured meats and dense bread. You try to steady your breathing, ignore the twinge in your gut, and tell yourself this is fine. Normal, professional. Shakespeare probably tooted. Everyone did. But they didn't have to stand on a wooden stage under candlelight with 200 Londoners holding pickled eggs and tankards of warm ale staring right at them. Your fellow actors are milling around backstage, some humming their cues, some dabbing vinegar-drenched cloths under their noses to brace for the smell of the crowd. It's a common trick of the trade. Others are muttering lines, or complaining that their hose is riding up again. You know you're not the only one nervous, but you're beginning to suspect you may be the only one experiencing abdominal betrayal. Then comes the trumpet, your cue. You walk briskly onto the stage, legs stiff, doing your best to look noble. A nobleman, a prince, a knight of old. Not, say, a man who is clenching his glutes with the intensity of a Greek statue. The heat hits you. Oil lamps, body odor, open-air summer sun baking the wooden rafters. The noise of the crowd is constant. Talking, coughing, the occasional cackle of a drunk in the front row. You start your lines. You project. You stride confidently. You pretend you don't feel that gurgle, and you remember that this is what you trained for. Theatrics, timing, control, diction, dignity. Except, then it happens. Mid-sentence. Just a tiny puff of treachery, barely audible. A mouse's sigh, but you hear it, and you know. The man playing your brother on stage hears it too, and raises one eyebrow imperceptibly. You soldier on. That's what you're paid for. The show must go on, even if your insides are staging their own act. Now, don't worry. Not every performance ends in humiliation. In fact, most don't. But every actor in your troupe has had at least one moment. They joke about it backstage, whisper about who broke wind in front of the French ambassador, or who nearly fainted from the smell under the Queen's box. It's part of the job, unspoken, yet very smelled. One actor, Martin, the portly Falstaff type, insists that if you stand stage left near the trapdoor, the draft helps whisk any accidental noises away. Another swears by clenching your jaw in sync with your other muscles. A kind of full-body tension technique. It looks intense, possibly medical. Historians still argue whether early modern actors developed deliberate techniques for masking embarrassing bodily functions. Some believe they simply accepted them as part of the visceral, unfiltered experience of live theater. Others suggest there were unspoken codes and tricks, little bits of shared wisdom passed among players the way bartenders pass down secret drink recipes. And it makes sense. Elizabethan theater was chaotic. It was loud, rowdy, full of smells and snickers. Audiences expected realism, but not too much realism, if you get my drift. Still, actors had to maintain composure. That was the job. To play a king while your intestines were performing an off-script percussion solo. You finish your scene with only one minor flinch and retreat backstage. A few of your mates give you a sympathetic nod. One whispers, "Could have been worse." At least you weren't doing Hamlet's ghost scene. Apparently, echo chambers and silent but deadlies don't mix. Back in the dim corners of backstage, you find your vinegar cloth and dab it under your nose. You exhale. The worst is over. For tonight. Just wait until tomorrow's matinee. You're scheduled for a love scene, and you had lentils for lunch. You slump down onto a rickety wooden bench behind the curtain, your legs trembling slightly. Not from stage fright, but from sheer muscular exhaustion. You've just spent 15 minutes holding in what your body very much wanted to release, and now every fiber of your being is buzzing like a lute string pulled too tight. A pot of something vaguely meaty simmers near the corner where two costumers are sewing a torn jerkin. The smell doesn't help. You breathe through your mouth, which helps marginally, until you remember that you've got at least 3 more scenes tonight. Welcome to the job. In Elizabethan times, acting was not the genteel, revered profession we imagine today. It was sweaty, loud, frequently smelly, and sometimes involved real animals on stage: dogs, goats, or the occasional unlucky goose. Combine that with a total lack of indoor plumbing, medieval dietary habits, and woolen costumes layered like onions, and you've got the perfect recipe for digestive rebellion. You don't get a dressing room, you barely get a wall peg. What you get is a stew of bodies, voices, chicken bones, and heat, all swirled together in a backstage mess the size of a modern kitchen. And there's no real privacy. Everyone changes, coughs, and vents gas in full proximity. But still, you try not to be that guy. The truth is, everyone in the theater world has their own method for managing the inevitable. Your friend Simon, a tall and twitchy Mercutio type, insists on what he calls the pacing purge. He walks in circles before curtain until his bowels settle. Another actor, Bridget, who plays most of the male roles with more swagger than any man you've met, swears by tight wrappings across the abdomen, a bit of compression to keep everything where it belongs. She calls it her corset of containment. And then there's old Timothy. No one's quite sure how old he is. Some say 60, some say he's part ghost, but he claims to have developed a sixth sense for incoming danger. When the belly chatters, he tells you in his gravelly whisper, you find a corner and bless the shadows. He disappears before most shows for 10 full minutes. No one asks questions. Of course, there's one option everyone avoids, leaving the stage mid-performance. That's a career ender. You could be mid-poem, mid-sword fight, even mid-kiss. If you bolt, you'll be remembered forever and not fondly. Rumors swirl fast in the theater world, and farts, alas, echo louder than applause in certain circles, which is why actors got creative. You remember once watching a seasoned performer cleverly disguise a fart as a dramatic foot stomp. It was genius. He shouted a line, pounded the floorboards, and timed his release with the thunder of his boots. No one blinked. The illusion held. Another time, during a particularly emotional death scene, a clever colleague incorporated a deep groan and exaggerated wheeze. Sound covered. Smell. Well, nothing covers that. But at least it didn't sound like a trumpet solo from the netherworld. Some even leaned into the moment. You remember hearing about a certain comedic actor, stage name Poppet Wiggler, who once let loose during a scene and followed it with, "Alas, my soul escapes me," to thunderous laughter. Risky, but if you are in a comedic role, you can sometimes play it off. Tragedy? Not so much. Historians still argue whether there were actual scripts or actor manuals that included advice for bodily mishaps. Some believe players simply learned by doing and suffering. Others think older actors passed along a kind of oral tradition, whispering secrets about sound masking, fart shadows, and audience wind direction. A few scholars have even dug into records from the Revels office, the department responsible for theatrical oversight, looking for complaints or notes, but most find only the usual concerns: drunkenness, poor costumes, and one time someone tried to use an actual pig. But maybe the real answer is simpler. In an era before modern sensibilities, before microphones, deodorant, or proper diets, maybe everyone was just used to it. The theaters smelled. The streets smelled. The people really smelled. A fart on stage wasn't a catastrophe. It was background noise. Still, you imagine the stakes were higher in certain venues. You think of the court performances, those rare, glittering nights when the troupe performed for Queen Elizabeth herself. In those candlelit palaces, amid velvet drapes and golden goblets, one rogue omission might not just ruin a scene, but an entire career. One actor, Richard, claimed he once felt a storm brewing just as he stepped in front of Her Majesty. He recited his lines while holding his breath and pressing his thighs together like a clamshell. He said he saw God that night, and God looked deeply amused. Backstage, the conversation turns to food. Always a risky topic. Someone asks what you had for supper. You wince. Lentil pie, you admit. There's a collective groan. Rookie mistake, Bridget mutters. Lentils on show day? Might as well hang a sign around your neck. Beware below. You shrug. It was cheap. So's water, she says, but it doesn't try to kill your reputation. You laugh, but it's true. Actors knew to avoid certain foods on performance days. Cabbage, beans, anything pickled. Bread was usually safe. Ale, less so. A full stomach was a gamble, but an empty one left you light-headed and prone to fainting under the heat. Which brings you to your favorite backstage tradition, the pre-show belly rub. No, not some weird ritual, just a bit of crushed mint or thyme rubbed gently on the abdomen. It helps with digestion, calms the nerves, and, Bridget insists, wards off both demons and the devil's own trumpet. You've started doing it too. Can't hurt. The hours stretch. Another scene passes, then another. Your final monologue looms. This one's the hardest. Quiet, still, deeply emotional. Just you. a spotlight of torchlight, and the collective hush of a crowd hanging on your words. You breathe in, slowly. Outside, you say the first lines. Your voice is steady. Your core is calm. All is well, until someone in the third row lets one rip. Loud, juicy, immediate. A beat of silence follows, just long enough for the crowd to register, snicker, then burst into laughter. You wait, you smile, and with all the dignity you can muster, you say, "Even the heavens groan at my sorrow." Applause erupts, and just like that, you're a legend. You wake up the next morning in a haze of muscle cramps and crusty sweat, the sour tang of candle smoke still ghosting your clothes. Your voice is hoarse, your knees ache from too many dramatic collapses, and there's a lingering question in the back of your mind. Did that moment, your improv line after the audience fart, just make your career or curse you with a new nickname? Probably both. But that's the thing about being an actor in Elizabethan England. Reputation wasn't just your calling card, it was your armor. One misstep, one unfortunate stage slip or accidental toot too well timed, and you'd carry it for months, maybe years. Stories traveled faster than horses. And yet somehow, in this gas-laced world of theatrical glory and gastrointestinal Russian roulette, you kept going. Because you loved it. You pull on your doublet, still damp from last night, and trudge to the theater. Today is a matinee, which means the smells come quicker and the crowd comes rowdier. And by crowd, you mean the groundlings. If the nobles had fancy embroidered sleeves to press against their noses, the groundlings had onions. Or worse, nothing at all. They were the ones who stood packed into the yard in front of the stage, hot breath steaming up toward your platform. Their reactions were immediate, primal, and unfiltered. They cheered, they booed, they threw things. And when someone farted, it wasn't subtle. It was part of the show. There's even a running joke among the company. The louder the groundling, the stronger the breeze. A few swear you can tell the success of a play by how many interruptions are soundtracked by digestive distress. Of course, those standing spectators didn't always come to see you. Sometimes they just came to let loose. Scholars still argue whether the Globe and its kind were more stage or circus. Some plays were masterpieces. Others were just opportunities for vendors to sell meat pies and for drunkards to shout lewd suggestions. You climb the stage stairs, eyes still adjusting. The morning air is sharp, but not fresh. Not here. There's always something fermenting nearby. Maybe it's the Thames, maybe it's the stew from the vendor outside, or maybe it's just actors. Who can say? Your co-star today is Elwyn, a lad of barely 16, but with the face of a cherub and the lungs of a mule. He plays Juliet. That's right, you're Romeo. He's Juliet. You lock eyes, nod once, and he whispers, "Try not to explode during the kiss this time, lover." You glare. That was stage effects. He smirks. Sure, from the backstage of your bowels. The backstage, you've learned, is a world of code. There's the cough, which is your emergency alert if something internal is threatening mutiny. 1 cough, mild danger. 2, high alert. 3, you're on your own. Then there's the shift. Not a dance, but the subtle repositioning of one's body mid-scene to allow for silent evacuation. Elwyn's perfected it. He can twirl, gesture grandly, and clear space around him without breaking character. You're still learning. Costumes don't help. You're wearing 4 layers today. Linen shirt, woolen hose, quilted doublet, and a silk overlay the director insists gives you youthful tragedy. It also gives you thigh sweat. And when the heat builds, it acts like a sound chamber for your lower half. One slip, and your backside becomes the globe's new percussion section. You overhear a conversation near the prop table. Two older actors are arguing over something called the fool's loophole. Apparently, in comedic roles, there was an unspoken allowance, a license, really, for flatulence. Fools, jesters, and certain low-status characters were allowed to be crude, to be loud, to be real. And if one such character released a bit of wind, it could be interpreted as character work. One actor swears he once wrote a scene specifically to include a fart as a punchline. He timed it for the third line of a triplet. Line 1, setup. Line 2, escalation. Line 3, delivery, both verbal and gastrointestinal. The audience roared. Another says he knew an actor who could burp on cue and once convinced the director to let him respond from both ends in a tavern scene. It worked so well they extended the scene by 3 minutes just for laughs. Still, historians debate whether these moments were scripted, spontaneous, or simply tolerated. The play begins. You pace backstage, mouthing lines between deep, calculated breaths. No lentils today, just bread. But still, there's always risk. You've learned to eat slowly, chew everything, and never, never trust a silent stomach. During Act 2, a minor character lets out a real one mid-monologue. It's audible, it's proud, and it echoes like a cannon in a cave. The audience gasps, then giggles. To his credit, he pauses, raises a finger, and says, "Let none say this speech lacked delivery." You bite your lip to keep from laughing. That's how legends are born. Later, as you prepare for your scene, you spot an odd little talisman tied to a nearby pillar. It's a bundle of herbs, lavender, rosemary, and something vaguely peppery. You ask Bridget about it. "Smell ward," she says, shrugging. "Keeps the bad air out, or in, depends on how close you stand." Apparently, some actors believe in theater charms, little superstitions passed from player to player. There's a tradition that if you hang thyme in your dressing area, if you're lucky enough to have one, it absorbs both spirits and smells. Rosemary is for remembrance, but also for masking certain unwelcome reminders. Lavender calms the nerves and, allegedly, tightens the gut. Historians still debate whether this was folk medicine or just desperate hope. But the players believed. And when you're inches from disaster with every deep breath, you'll believe anything too. The show ends. The crowd applauds. You bow, relieved, literally and figuratively. Backstage, Simon claps you on the back. "No thunder from you tonight." You smirk. "I'm saving it for the critics." He laughs. "God help them." As the sun sets, you make your way to the tavern. Your coin purse is light, but your spirit is high. One more performance survived. No scandals, no nicknames. Yet. But tomorrow is another show. Another risk. Another chance for glory. Or gassery. You're halfway through your second mug of ale when the jokes start rolling in like a slow, pungent fog. You hear about Cedric? Elwyn leans over the table, grinning like he's hiding a royal decree. He tried to cough over one last night and ended up sounding like a dying goose. The table erupts with laughter. Cedric, seated 2 stools down, raises his mug with mock dignity. "Better a goose than a squeaky door, which is what you sounded like this morning." That's the thing about life after the show. It doesn't stop when the curtain metaphorically falls. The tavern becomes the green room, the confessional, and the gossip column rolled into one. Here, every fart has a name, every slip a witness, and every performance 1,000 second-hand rewrites. There's a term you've heard whispered, usually between actors too old to care about pride: the ghost breath. Supposedly, it refers to a phenomenon during intense scenes, usually death monologues or whispered soliloquies, where a player, too focused on pathos, forgets their own body's rebellion. A sudden gust, often misattributed to a spectral presence, sneaks out from the actor's robes, echoing with eerie subtlety. Was it a haunting? Was it gas? Historians still argue whether this term originated in jest or from genuine audience belief that spirits were somehow part of the globe's nightly programming. But ghost breath is now your company's go-to euphemism for any mysterious offstage breeze. You think about that during the next rehearsal, when the director, a wiry man with a constantly furrowed brow and a voice that wobbles between rage and recitation, asks for more tension in Act 4. "I need the room to feel your suffering," he insists. "It should smell like doom." Wrong word choice, you think. Still, you push. You draw up that tragic energy, pour yourself into every syllable, and just as you hit the crescendo of your sorrow, Elwyn starts coughing violently in the wings. He's not sick. He's stifling laughter. You know why. The echo from the stage's wooden floor just gave your dramatic pause a little too much. Accompaniment. Later, during notes, the director says nothing, but the lighting boy gives you a thumbs up. "Best exit yet," he whispers. You're learning to embrace it. Not celebrate it, not yet, but survive it. And part of that survival comes from adapting your tools. Let's talk about padding. No, not for falls, though those are brutal enough on a splintery oak stage. This padding serves a different purpose. Some actors quietly line the inside of their hose with folded cloth. Not for comfort, for muffling. One actor claims he uses crushed reeds in his doublet lining. Something about acoustic dampening. Another swears by leather patches sewn beneath the tunic, meant to redirect sound downward rather than outward. It's like soundproofing a cannonball. There's even a rumor of a player who created what he called the velvet trap, a pouch of rabbit fur and oats designed to catch and neutralize any outburst. Nobody knows if it worked, but the man did have a very suspiciously wide gait. Then there's the food. Everyone has their list. You avoid cabbage. Elwyn swears by mint tea before a show. Bridget eats raw ginger, claiming it calms the thunder. Simon fasts completely, which is probably why he faints at least once a month on stage. Somehow, despite all these rituals, despite the potpourri of efforts to stay stage safe, disaster strikes regularly. And when it does, it must be spun. That's a rule. If a groundling calls you out, spin it. If a noble turns up their nose and pretends to faint, spin harder. Once, an actor tripped, fell into the crowd, and passed wind mid-collapse. He stood, bowed deeply, and declared, "'Twas the wind of fate that bore me to thee." He got a standing ovation. Improvisation becomes your lifeline. If the moment can't be avoided, it must be transformed. You hear stories from traveling troupes of actors who turned farts into thunderclaps. Literally. One troupe carried a small metal drum backstage and, when disaster loomed, struck it in sync to mask any offending noise. They claimed it was to simulate distant cannon fire in battle scenes. The audience never knew better. Some props served double duty. Heavy cloaks could be dramatically flung to distract attention. Wooden staffs were slammed theatrically, punctuating lines and covering unfortunate punctuation from the body. Even sandals, yes, some fools wore them, could be dragged for a brief, strategic scrape. You adopt a few tricks of your own. subtle steps forward during tense moments, hand gestures that just happen to align with creaky floorboards, a cough delivered half a beat before danger strikes, theatrical sleight of sound. You're no fool. You know that no matter how rich the poetry, the audience remembers the flubs. Shakespeare may have written the stars into your mouth, but it's the slips they quote back at you on the street. One day, an apprentice approaches you outside the theater, shy and stammering. You were brilliant in Lear, he says. You puff up. And when you know, after the line about stormy skies, your chest deflates. It was like poetic realism. You nod solemnly. That's the aim, you reply, stone-faced. Behind you, Elwyn snorts loud enough to echo. So you roll with it. You start naming them. Not all of them, mind you. Just the most memorable. Like the midwife's sigh during a scene of tragic birth. Or the royal trumpet during the coronation sequence. You even christen Elwyn's worst performance the Tempest Act 2.5. These names get whispered like sacred lore in the wings. Older actors share them with younger ones like bedtime ghost stories, only smellier. There's a comfort in that. A lineage of laughter. A recognition that through all the art and elegance, the stage is still shared by humans. Breathing, sweating, bursting humans. As the week winds on, the stories stack. You've joined a secret fraternity, an olfactory brotherhood bound by gas and grace. And, as odd as it sounds, it makes you feel closer to them all. Because at the end of the day, or the end of the act, it's not about hiding the imperfections. It's about embracing them so fully they become part of the show. So, when you see that groundling wiping tears of laughter from his cheeks after your unexpected flourish, you bow deeper. Because that, too, is applause. You're center stage, about to deliver a line so dramatic it once made the playwright cry during rehearsal, and your brain is doing the most Elizabethan thing possible, praying for your digestive system to hold it together. It's almost funny. Almost. But you're not alone in this daily gamble. Every actor on that stage, from the lowest extra to the leading man, is quietly waging war against betrayal from within. And now, after weeks of watching, performing, enduring, and occasionally choking back laughter, or worse, you've begun to notice the deeper patterns. Because it turns out, even stage farts have roles to play. Let's start with the most dangerous zone, the soliloquy. Ah, yes, the beautiful, spotlighted island where your voice should echo with passion, philosophy, and human truth. Instead, it's the loneliest place for a flatulent misstep. No fellow cast member to smother your shame. No dramatic sword clash to steal attention. Just you, the stage, the silence, and an audience so still you can hear a lute string vibrate in the pit. Soliloquies are the ultimate gamble, and they have created some of the greatest disasters. You remember Elwyn's to be or not to be moment. He was halfway through, eyes misted with the existential weight of life, when a sound emerged. Small but sharp. He froze. One groundling giggled, then another. By the time he reached, "And by asleep to say we end," 3 people were audibly wheezing. Elwyn finished the monologue, and bowed, and never performed it again. The trick you're learning is placement. See, certain scenes offer natural camouflage. Crowd scenes, battle scenes, anything with drums or shouting. A well-placed outburst can be masked by a war cry or a body falling theatrically. But that's a rare luxury. Dances, surprisingly tricky. All the motion means your body's working overtime. And one wrong twirl can unleash a disaster that follows you like a vengeful spirit. Historians still argue whether the famous fire during a 1613 performance of Henry VIII was caused by a misfired cannon, or, as one satirical pamphlet claimed, a deadly gust from the bowels of Mars. It's absurd, yes, but the fact that anyone believed it says everything about how closely audiences watched and sniffed. Then there's the sword fight. Sword fights are lifesavers. They're loud, chaotic, and offer enough distraction for even the most poorly timed gasps. But they come with their own risks. You once saw two actors fencing during a tense Act 5 duel. One lunged too far. The other doubled over, not from the blow, but from what followed it. The sword clattered to the floor. The audience thought it was a brilliant comedic twist. The director didn't. From that day on, a new rule entered your company's unofficial handbook. Never trust a thrust after soup. Now, not all moments are equal. Some lend themselves beautifully to covering up the occasional bodily outburst. Take the crying scene. No one questions a sniffle, a wince, a sudden jolt. Tears mask many sins, and the quivering breath of sorrow can double as a recovery moment if something slips. A well-timed sob can be your escape hatch. Once, you wept so loudly during a scene that the audience erupted in applause, believing they'd witnessed pure, raw emotion. You had, in fact, just dodged a thunderous betrayal of the stomach, but they'll never know. Then there's singing. It should be safe, right? Wrong. Singing is the great risk. Why? Because when you sing, your core tightens, your posture locks. Everything in your body is straining for control, and in that control lies weakness. You recall a musical interlude gone tragically wrong. An actor known for his booming baritone hit the final note of a love song, held it triumphantly, and was instantly betrayed by a rumble from below. The audience burst into laughter. The lute player dropped his instrument. He tried to cover it with an encore. Big mistake, because the second note brought a second offense. He's now known as Double Barrel Tom. You all remember him fondly. He sells boots now. Sometimes the problem isn't what's heard, but what's smelled. The olfactory sneak attack. These are the worst, because they leave ambiguity behind. The sound, debatable. The odor, not so much. There's no saving the scene when the front row recoils, when the actors start eyeing each other suspiciously, when the lighting boy lights a candle early. You've seen a tragic death scene ruined by one such rogue moment. The dying hero collapsed beautifully, just as a wave of something unholy swept across the stage. The audience, moved seconds before, suddenly looked as if death had claimed them. No one could keep a straight face. The corpse wheezed with laughter. The villain fled the stage in self-preservation. And yet, somehow, it became legend. People came back just in case it happened again. They called it the stink of tragedy. A playwright even wrote a short parody about it, which was also banned. But not before it packed the playhouse. You learn from all of this. You start to assess each scene, not just for your lines or blocking, but for its buffer capacity. Does it have cover noise? Can you move? Are you likely to be alone? You even develop a mental rating system. Safe, battle, market scene, risky, duet, romantic speech, dangerous, soliloquy, death scene, catastrophic, silent tableau. There's also the weather to consider. Open-air theaters like the Globe depend heavily on luck. Rain can dampen sounds and moods. Wind carries everything. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it makes things worse. A particularly strong gust once made a whisper sound like a war horn. Guess what it did to Elwyn's misfire? It gave it wings. The audience applauded what they thought was a sound effect. Elwyn bowed. And so it goes. You begin to accept that part of the job, part of this life, is constant vigilance, constant humor, and, above all, adaptation. Because theater isn't about perfection, it's about illusion. And as long as the audience believes the illusion, even when the air is thick and the stage floor creaks with betrayal, you're still winning. And when that illusion fails, make them laugh so hard they forget what they smelled. You lean against a backstage pillar, listening as the wooden stage above vibrates with footsteps and the echo of rehearsed lines. There's a lull between scenes, and that means it's time for the real performance to begin. Backstage blame games. Because when a mysterious puff of sulfur drifts from somewhere near the costume rack, and every actor conveniently finds a sudden need to check their boots, you know what's going on. The art of denial in the Elizabethan theater is practically its own role. It begins with the look, that slow, side-eyed scan of everyone within radius. It says, "I didn't do it, but I'm about to identify the guilty party like a detective with a powdered wig." And then comes the shift. Someone coughs a little too loudly, another fiddles with their belt ties, and a third starts sniffing like a bloodhound. No one speaks, but the energy? Tangible. You've become an expert in the signs. Like when Robert the young understudy flares his nostrils, then walks off muttering, "Strange air today." That's a textbook dodge. Or when Maud, the costume mistress, starts blaming the horsehair from the doublets. "It's organic," she says. "It traps odors." Uh-huh, Maud. One time, a fart was so strong it knocked over a prop, a chair, and still no one confessed. Historians still argue whether actors genuinely couldn't admit these things due to Elizabethan codes of modesty, or if they were just too proud to let the fart win. Pride, after all, was everything. And a public slip, even backstage, could follow you. Take the story of Barnaby, a brooding actor known for his Hamlet. One ill-timed rehearsal puff, and a laugh from the lute player, and Barnaby lost his serious reputation for good. Audiences started calling him Humblet. He was not amused. It's no wonder actors developed clever scapegoats. Rats. Rats were perfect. They were real, they were noisy, and no one liked them. Someone makes a suspicious sound? "Rat in the props bin," someone whispers, and everyone breathes easier, if not cleaner. Then there's the wooden floorboard excuse. That reliable creak, if timed just right, could mask, or replace, the offending sound. Many a fart has been blamed on loose joinery. You even saw a particularly daring actor blame the wind. Indoors, during a calm summer night. He waved his hand dramatically and shouted, "Merciful breeze." The door swings again. There was no door, but the commitment, Oscar-worthy. And when all else fails, the old standby, the ghost. Elizabethan theaters loved their ghosts. Every company had one. A murdered stagehand, a disgraced playwright, a betrayed patron. So when something strange happened, be it a flickering candle or a scent that singed the nose hairs, you could always whisper, "The ghost walks tonight." Audiences loved it. They ate it up. "The spirit of Shakespeare himself must be watching," one noblewoman murmured, after a particularly sulphurous performance. Either that, or someone had cabbage for breakfast. One of your favorite backstage rituals is the collective lie. After a slip, everyone just decides it didn't happen. A silent pact. Like when Edwin tripped, let out a blast, then finished his line perfectly. At curtain call, no one mentioned it, not a single soul. But everyone patted him on the back, silently, meaningfully. And Edwin? He bowed like a knight. That's what makes denial so effective. It's not just for protection, it's for unity. A bad smell on stage is a temporary embarrassment. But laughter at a fellow actor's expense? That's betrayal. So you all pretend, together. Some go further. They own it without owning it. Like Lionel, who, after a scene-ending rip, would exit and say, "The bard speaks through me." Was he kidding? Maybe, but the phrase caught on. Now, any time disaster strikes, someone whispers it backstage. A small mercy to keep the giggles down. Even the playwrights joined in. You once found a script with a margin note. If Tristram eats onions again, rewrite line to include thunder. Practical? Absolutely. Poetic? Maybe not. But necessary? You bet. Fringe methods appeared too. Some actors developed subtle gestures to warn others. A tug at the sleeve, a tap of the foot, a raised brow. These were the unspoken signals. I'm about to unleash, or someone just did. You saw an actress once freeze on stage, then very slowly lift her arm and wave her hand behind her skirt. Just once. The audience thought it was a dramatic flourish. It was not. And, oh, the props. Cushions stuffed with herbs, cloaks laced with lavender. Someone even stitched cloves into the hem of a doublet once. The result? The actor smelled like spiced ham, but at least it masked other offenses. One night, the theater manager himself tossed sage into the orchestra pit. "Cleanses the air," he muttered. And then he glared at the young apprentices like he knew something. You've also heard of companies keeping a sacrificial extra, someone low-ranking who gets blamed for any mishap. Poor Humphrey. Every strange smell. Humphrey. A sword goes missing? Humphrey. A dog runs on stage. Still Humphrey. But hey, at least he got free meat pies from sympathetic costume girls. Of course, sometimes there was no hiding, no blaming, no pretending. Those are the moments where the truth just hangs in the air. Literally. That time when 3 actors farted simultaneously during a scene change. The audience gasped. The stagehands ducked. And someone in the front row whispered, "Is this part of the play?" The director cried. You watched him. Real tears. But you all survived. Because the greatest tool you have isn't denial, it's recovery. A smirk. A pause. A perfectly timed joke. You once saw an actor break character mid-speech, bow slightly, and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, even the soul protests this monologue." Thunderous applause. Saved the night. And when that doesn't work, blame the dog, even if there was no dog. Because in the Elizabethan theater, truth is flexible, history is always being rewritten, and dignity. Dignity is what you pretend you never lost in the first place. You shuffle through the straw-scattered backstage corridor and wonder, honestly, how any of this works at all. Not the lighting, candles, wildly unpredictable. Not the costuming, mostly borrowed, sometimes stolen, but the choreography of survival. Specifically when digestive rebellion hits mid-soliloquy. Because the Elizabethan stage wasn't known for subtlety or plumbing, and that meant certain internal storms had to be predicted, dodged, or downright danced around. Literally. Tonight's lesson, the onstage fidget, a time-honored method of fart camouflage that blends physical theater with gastrointestinal shame. You've seen it pulled off with breathtaking grace. A subtle shift in stance, maybe a pretend limp introduced on the fly. A flourish of the hand as if brushing away invisible bees. These aren't just dramatic choices. They're evasive maneuvers. The first trick every actor learns? Movement hides sound. You shuffle, you spin, you drop to one knee like you're communing with the ghosts of kings. But really, you're buying time. buying air, buying dignity. Mainstream theater manuals from the time. Yes, they existed, often handwritten and circulated in elite actor circles. Mention posture, diction, stage presence, and suspiciously vague lines like, "Use thy body wisely to conceal unpleasantries." You see what they did there. Now, every company had its own code for emergency movement. One group trained a kind of stage cough into their blocking, tiny, choreographed hackings that masked both noise and smell. Another used fan flourishes, waving perfumed props between lines as if fighting off invisible demons. But not every attempt succeeded. You remember poor Elswith, trying to cover a noisy escape with a sweeping curtsy. The bow went too low. The result? Well, let's just say everyone remembered that matinee. And what about Alan, the method actor? He once claimed that incorporating a fart into a character's arc was authentic theater. My Lord Piers is haunted by digestion, he told the director. He was booed, dramatically. Historians still argue whether this sort of stage improvisation added depth to characters or just ruined the illusion. Some say Elizabethan audiences, used to markets and manure, didn't even notice. Others insist that even in the 1590s, people knew when a sound wasn't scripted. One fringe theory even suggests a secret signal system, an early form of what we'd now call a stage manager fart alert. A flick of the candle, a pause in the lute playing, or even a sharp foot stamp could warn actors to brace themselves or adjust blocking. You hear whispers of a particularly disciplined troupe that rehearsed for this. They called it the wind drill. Imagine 10 grown adults simulating dramatic lunges, all in sync, each time a stomach gurgled. It was like fart tai chi. Beautiful, absurd, necessary. But here's the truth that no actor admits out loud. Timing is everything. A quiet scene, deadly. A somber, slow-burning monologue, fatal. That's why so many preferred roles with chaos. Drunkards, fools, tempests, and battle scenes. They gave you cover. They gave you noise. They gave you wiggle room, sometimes literally. You once saw an actor insert a mock sword duel where none existed, just to avoid standing still. He explained afterward, "My stomach's schedule did not align with the bard's." And honestly, fair. The Elizabethan obsession with symbolic gesture helped. Broad acting meant big movements. Wide arms, dramatic kneels, spins, collapses. All perfect for sudden directional redirection. You weren't avoiding the audience. You were becoming the wind. There's a documented account of a jester character, likely inspired by Richard Tarleton, who built bodily distress into his act. Contemporary notes describe how he'd cross his legs, bend low, and then pop back up like a jack-in-the-box. "Methinks he battles inner beasts," one noble wrote in his diary. You think, yeah, that noble knew exactly what was going on. The stage itself helped, or betrayed. Wooden planks amplified noise, but those same planks, if spaced just right, could swallow sound. You'd learn the boards like terrain. Step between the third and fourth, amplified echo. Step near the rear curtain post, blessed muffling. Some desperate actors developed a strange waddle, a walk that shook the body but silenced the air. You can't explain it, but once you've seen it, you never forget. A strange, bow-legged dance of shame, yet oddly graceful. And oh, the scenery. A well-placed curtain could muffle. A tree prop could be used as both shield and alibi. One actor once stepped behind a fake shrub mid-scene, muttered "nature calls," and let loose. Came back out still in character, still holding a plastic owl. Legend. Sometimes the orchestra pitched in. You've seen lutanists strum dramatically at key moments. Once, a drummer rolled thunder precisely as a nobleman on stage adjusted his belt with suspicious urgency. Coincidence? You hope not. But of course, the real MVP. Audience distraction. You could do a lot when the crowd's attention was elsewhere. An elaborate gesture upstage, a tossed glove, a misplaced servant suddenly scurrying across stage. The Elizabethans loved busy stages, and that gave actors cover for personal business. Of course, not all choreography was for defense. Some brave souls went the other way. Offense. They turned the moment into spectacle. A dramatic spin followed by a slight grimace, a wafting hand motion, a theatrical sniff. You'd swear they were daring the audience to notice. And sometimes the audience did, and laughed. Because maybe the real truth is this. While Elizabethan actors feared the fart, they also understood its power. Comedy, tragedy, mystery, they all came with risk. And nothing risked more than letting your body interrupt your art. So you planned your moves. You faked a sprain. You pretended to stumble. You added a limp. Anything to hide what your guts refused to. All this choreography, all these adjustments, just so you could deliver your lines with dignity intact. You'd end the scene with applause in your ears and a bead of sweat on your brow. Not from the drama, but from the narrowly avoided disaster. And as the curtain fell and you took your bow, you'd know. You survived another performance. Barely. You stretch your arms backstage, feeling the worn linen of your tunic shift against your skin, and brace yourself. Not for the drama of tonight's performance. No, that's old hat. You're preparing for the real challenge. How to fake a medical emergency just long enough to let one rip unnoticed. Yes, tonight we explore the art of the fake faint. This isn't your usual stagecraft. This is survival theater. You're not just performing as a love-struck noble or a vengeful ghost. You're performing as someone who absolutely did not just audibly offend the olfactory peace of 36 groundlings in the front row. See, in the Elizabethan age, people fainted a lot, at least theatrically. Whether it was a swooning maiden or a grieving father, collapsing to the floor was both dramatic and strategic. If timed well, it gave you a solid 5 to 10 seconds of chaos in which anything could happen, including a discreet release of internal pressure, and actors got clever with it. You learn early that stage fainting isn't just about falling. It's about how you fall. Too slow and it looks fake. Too fast and you risk head injury, and worse, farting on impact. The ideal faint is a slow crumble. Knees buckling just as you lean against a conveniently located pillar, or fall into the arms of another actor who's well trained in bracing and holding his breath. Historians still argue whether this tactic started as improvisation or came from actor training manuals passed through secret guild circles. One theory suggests an underground group known as the Order of the Sigh, who shared the 12 moves of the unseen wind. A faint-focused technique list kept hidden inside hollowed-out prop skulls. You wonder if it's real. Then you remember the elaborate way Thomas always staggers sideways mid-dialogue, clutches his chest, and lands with one foot curled under. Too specific to be instinct. Fringe accounts even describe actors bringing herbs or vinegar-soaked rags to sniff before a faint. A method cue, they'd say, while actually masking suspicious bodily sounds with a convincing groan and swoon. Some took it further. You recall Eliza, queen of the long fall. She'd faint in 3 acts. First, the wobble, then the hand to forehead, then a low moan. Not too loud, just enough to cause alarm. By the time she hit the boards, any sound she'd released was drowned out by gasps and shuffling from the audience. And, oh, the sympathy. "I feared for her very life," one noblewoman cried, fanning herself as Eliza lay dramatically in the spotlight, eyes fluttering. Backstage, Eliza winked at you and whispered, "That was lunch's revenge." Of course, fake fainting isn't all glory. Sometimes it backfired. Once, an overzealous young actor attempted a grand collapse in a scene that wasn't his. No lines, no movement planned, just pure panic and a preemptive plummet. The director was furious. "You stole the spotlight from Hamlet's ghost," he screamed. To be fair, the ghost's entrance had indeed been upstaged by a loud, mysterious thump and an unconvincing groan of, "My heart, it races." And there was always the risk of misjudging distance. One infamous tale recalls an actor trying to faint near a bench prop and missing entirely, cracking his hip on the floor. The fart was masked, sure, but so was the rest of his week while he recovered. But still, the tactic survived for a reason. When used well, it was foolproof, especially in scenes with built-in emotion. You cry, you shudder, you crumple like parchment in rain. Nobody questions the moment, least of all the audience, who were often too distracted by the theatrics to wonder about any background acoustics. Fake vomiting also became a useful diversion. Not because anyone truly believed it, but because it grossed everyone out just enough to forget whatever else was happening. One actor kept a pouch of chewed breadcrumbs soaked in ale just for such emergencies. He'd make retching noises, spit dramatically, and slump to the side while murmuring, "I am not well." No one asked questions. Even royalty fell for it. There's a story, half confirmed, of a performance attended by Queen Elizabeth I herself. Midway through a tragic scene, one actor dropped to the floor with such conviction that the Queen reportedly stood in concern. He later confessed to the troupe that he had narrowly escaped disaster thanks to an act of divine swoon. You imagine the royal court reporting back that night. Excellent performance. Bit of a digestive mystery on stage, but otherwise superb. Actors would even use each other for cover. A sudden embrace, a dramatic carry, or a frantic attempt to revive someone meant all eyes were on the prone body, not the suspicious noise just before it. And the audience? Complicit. They never admitted it, but they knew. You'd see the glances, the winces. The brief fan flutters from front row ladies. But no one said a word. The social contract of live theater. What happens on stage stays on stage. Even the unscripted air biscuits. Still, the tactic evolved. By the 1590s, troupes had fallback roles. Characters known for swooning, coughing, or trembling. Perfect roles for actors prone to digestive complications. One anonymous journal entry from a player lists his roles as man in fever, witch's victim, and dramatic corpse number 3. All involved lying down, groaning, and doing very little, while surrounded by chaos. You see the genius, and when all else failed, there was the mercy feint, a kind of theatrical white flag. You go down mid-line, maybe even whisper, "Forgive me," the vapors, and hope your fellow actors cover for you. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they turn your fall into a new plot twist. The prince is poisoned. The bishop collapses from guilt. The servant has been cursed. Improvised drama is beautiful when it masks biological betrayal. So tonight, when your gut twists mid-speech, you know what to do. You sway a little, you blink, you clutch your side. You let out a low, desperate groan. half pain, half shame, and tumble into the waiting arms of your castmate, who instantly starts shouting, "A healer! A healer!" The audience leans forward, and you exhale. With dignity mostly intact, you find yourself pacing behind the velvet curtain, heart pounding. Not from nerves, but because of a slow-burning pressure that's been building since supper. The room buzzes faintly with whispered lines and muffled footsteps as actors prepare for the next scene, but your mind drifts toward the old remedy books stacked in the company's shared dressing room. Tonight, we dive into Elizabethan remedies for stage comfort. Those curious concoctions and rituals actors swore by to keep their bodies in check, especially on the digestive front. You already know the Elizabethan diet wasn't exactly a spa day for your insides. Heavy on breads, salted meats, and ales, it was a recipe for internal turmoil if you weren't careful. So actors developed their own backstage pharmacopoeia, some practical, some borderline bizarre. One popular trick was the use of fennel seeds. Actors chewed these tiny, licorice-flavored morsels to calm the stomach and reduce gas. You imagine the gentle crunch as you pop a seed yourself. The subtle sweetness lingers, offering a moment of relief amid the chaos. Fennel was the go-to, soothing, familiar, and just spicy enough to mask a nervous gulp. But it wasn't the only herb in their arsenal. There was also the mysterious stomach powder, a blend of crushed peppermint, angelica, and sometimes even dried wormwood. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. Wormwood sounds like something out of a witch's cookbook. Yet, some swear it worked wonders on indigestion and kept the dreaded silent but deadly moments at bay. Historians still argue whether these powders were medicinal or more placebo. Some suggest they were sold by quack apothecaries eager to cash in on desperate players. Then there's the curious case of crocodile dung. No, really. An odd little snippet tucked away in a scribbled playbill refers to a topical poultice used by some actors to relieve stomach pains and bloating. It was said to be cooling and drying. You're not quite sure whether to be intrigued or horrified. Thankfully, most of these remedies were taken internally. One of the more practical inventions was the actor's belt, a simple leather strap tied around the waist, sometimes containing pockets for herbs or small bags of charcoal, which was believed to absorb unpleasant odors and ease digestive discomfort. But what really fascinates you is the social ritual around these remedies. Before every show, the troupe gathered for what they called the tincture toast. It was part superstition, part medicine, a shared moment to calm nerves, ward off bad smells, and build camaraderie. You imagine the circle, a half-dozen actors each sipping from tiny wooden cups filled with herbal infusions, the air thick with the scent of mint and rosemary. Someone coughs discreetly, someone else chuckles softly, and for a few moments, the weight of performance lifts. Of course, these remedies weren't foolproof. There are tales of actors who trusted too heavily in a stomach powder, only to find themselves with a worse problem on stage, an unfortunate mix of dizziness and a sudden urge that no poultice could fix. And then there's the nightly debate among scholars. Were these cures truly a form of early medical science or elaborate rituals designed more to comfort the mind than the body? You lean back, recalling the worn wooden bench you sat on last week during rehearsal, clutching your own peppermint sachet and hoping for the best. Sometimes you think the real trick to surviving Elizabethan theater wasn't the lines or the costumes, but how well you managed your stomach. The stage lights are low now, a dim glow flickering like a gentle campfire as the crew quietly rearranges props for the next scene. You're backstage, and the familiar pressure builds again, not just from nerves, but from the delicate balancing act your body demands. Tonight, you settle in to explore Elizabethan stage etiquette and gas, the unspoken rules. If you think the bard's troupe simply carried on regardless, think again. In an era before microphones or plush dressing rooms, actors had to navigate a minefield of social expectations surrounding bodily functions, especially the dreaded stage fart. There was no official silent fart policy, but there were plenty of whispered taboos and clever workarounds. You picture yourself stepping into the heavy velvet cloak of an Elizabethan actor, whose reputation could easily be punctured by a poorly timed toot. To start, actors quickly learned that subtlety was key. A sudden, loud release could shatter a scene's illusion or spark unwanted laughter. Not the relaxed chuckle of an audience enjoying a clever joke, but the uncomfortable snort that makes you want to crawl under the stage. Instead, many adopted what you might call the artful cough. When an urge threatened, a well-timed cough or a gentle clearing of the throat could mask the sound. You can almost hear it. Ahem, ahem, blending seamlessly into dialogue, while a few actors might even shift their footing or tap their heel to add a layer of ambient noise. There were also elaborate positional tricks. Actors often angled their bodies away from the audience or leaned against the backdrop in ways that helped muffle any unexpected sounds. The worn wooden floorboards did their part too, creaking just enough to disguise minor noises. This unspoken choreography required constant awareness and agility. Of course, there was always a risk. You think about poor Tom, the young actor in the company who once couldn't stifle a particularly stubborn bout of flatulence during a solemn soliloquy. The audience didn't know what to do, caught between shock and amusement, and the rest of the cast had to improvise rapidly to save the scene. Historians still argue whether these moments were truly mortifying for actors or simply accepted as part of the live theater experience. Some accounts suggest audiences enjoyed the humanity of it all. Others insist such mishaps were frowned upon. Interestingly, the etiquette extended beyond the stage. Backstage, there was an informal code. Actors would discreetly signal to one another if the danger zone was approaching. A quick touch on the arm, a raised eyebrow, or a shared glance could mean it was time to reach for a sachet of herbs, or retreat briefly behind a curtain. You can imagine the camaraderie and silent understanding, the relief when a friend muffled a slip, or the collective sympathy when someone wasn't quite so lucky. The etiquette also influenced costume design. Some outfits included looser garments or discreet padding that allowed a bit of escape room for bodily functions. Comfort was crucial when you might be wearing heavy layers under sweltering stage lights for hours. One particularly amusing story involves an actor whose elaborate ruff was rumored to act as a muffler, much like a modern scarf. Whether true or not, it became a running joke in the company. You settle into this dance of discretion and survival, realizing that stage fart etiquette was less about embarrassment and more about mutual respect. Respect for the craft, for your fellow actors, and for the audience's suspension of disbelief. As you prepare to step back into the world of Elizabethan theater, you carry with you a newfound appreciation for the quiet battles fought behind the scenes, where a well-timed cough could save an entire performance. The audience's murmurs swell once more, signaling the play's climax is near. Behind the scenes, you feel a familiar flutter. Not excitement this time, but the quiet dread of bodily betrayal. Tonight, you dive into the role of stage design and props in concealing noisy moments. Elizabethan theaters weren't just wooden platforms. They were intricate stages where architecture and props became secret allies in the battle against unwanted sounds. You picture the Globe Theater's open-air design, the thatched roof casting shadows over a bustling yard where patrons stood, chatted, and occasionally giggled at the human foibles on display. One architectural feature that helped was the tiring house, a backstage area where actors changed costumes and caught brief respites. Its thick wooden walls didn't just block noise from the outside, they also muffled any suspicious noises from within. You can almost hear the distant laughter of the pit mingling with the quiet rustle of a costume adjustment and the discreet release of pent-up air. On stage, set pieces offered more than just visual appeal. Large tapestries, heavy curtains, and props like barrels or benches created pockets of sound absorption. An actor could strategically position themselves behind a folding screen or lean against a wooden pillar, turning a potentially loud slip into a gentle, muffled whisper. Historians still argue whether some props were deliberately designed with acoustics in mind, or if these benefits were happy accidents. Either way, the stage was a toolbox full of subtle defenses against the unpredictability of the human body. You imagine an actor mid-scene, shifting behind a large chest, timing their movement perfectly to coincide with a well-rehearsed line or a booming drum beat. The audience's focus is so tightly fixed on the drama that no one notices the faintest hint of something else. The use of sound cues like thunder sheets or rattling chains also provided auditory cover. You picture the booming rumble of a thunder machine or the eerie clink of iron chains filling the theater, giving actors the perfect chance to mask any embarrassing sounds. And it wasn't just props. The actors' blocking was choreographed with an ear for timing. Moving in groups, turning backs at key moments, or shifting weight from foot to foot helped disguise any bodily noises. You almost admire this pre-modern sound engineering, a dance of discretion woven into every gesture. One amusing anecdote involves an actor who used a large, ornate fan not only as a costume piece but also to discreetly waft away unwanted odors, a handy trick in a crowded, sweat-filled space. Backstage, you picture the constant tinkering with props and costumes, the whispered advice, stand near the tapestry for that scene. It'll do wonders for the situation. The balance of design and performance created a delicate ecosystem where even nature's interruptions could be tamed or hidden. You reflect on the subtle genius of these solutions, marveling at how stagecraft extended far beyond the visible, embracing the invisible sounds and smells that modern audiences rarely consider. The last applause fades as the actors gather backstage, exchanging tired smiles and sharing relief that another performance survived its bodily challenges. Now, you step quietly into herbal remedies and diet, how Elizabethan actors tried to prevent stage gas. The Elizabethan period was an age of herbal lore and early medical theory, and actors, ever practical, dabbled in all sorts of home remedies to keep their digestive systems calm before stepping into the spotlight. Imagine a cluttered dressing room filled with the scents of dried herbs, roots, and spiced brews. You hold a bundle of lavender and rosemary in your hand, imagining these calming herbs tucked into pouches or steeped in teas to soothe the stomach. Actors believed these fragrant plants could ward off indigestion and, by extension, unwanted gas. Fennel seeds were another popular remedy, chewed discreetly before shows for their reputed ability to ease bloating and quiet the belly's rumblings. You picture the cast passing around small leather pouches filled with seeds, sharing tips and stories about what worked best. Historians still argue whether these herbal treatments genuinely prevented stage flatulence or if their effects were largely placebo. But belief in their power was strong, and the ritual of preparation likely helped actors focus and calm nerves. Diet was equally important. Actors often avoided heavy, greasy foods on performance days, favoring lighter fare like porridge, bread, and mild cheeses. Spicy or gas-inducing ingredients, like cabbage or beans, were strictly off-limits. You imagine the challenge of maintaining such a diet in bustling Elizabethan London, where food options were limited and often inconsistent. Interestingly, some actors reportedly carried small bottles of vinegar or wormwood tinctures backstage, ready to be sipped in moments of digestive distress. The sharp tang of vinegar might sound off-putting to modern ears, but it was considered a quick fix for calming the stomach. You might chuckle at the image of a troupe leader discreetly sniffing a vial between scenes, hoping to stave off any embarrassing interruptions. The use of these remedies also reflected broader Elizabethan beliefs about the body and humorism. The idea that balancing the four bodily humors could influence health and temperament. Actors, keenly aware of their physical state, took these theories to heart, blending superstition with early science. Backstage conversations often included debates about which herbs were most effective, with some favoring mint for its refreshing qualities, while others swore by chamomile's gentle touch. This ritual of herbal preparation became part of the performance's rhythm, an almost meditative practice that gave actors a sense of control over their unpredictable bodies. You imagine that moment just before stepping onto the stage, sipping a calming tea, inhaling the soothing scent of herbs, and feeling a quiet confidence wash over you. It's a reminder that even centuries ago, actors embraced both practical and mystical approaches to keep their performances smooth, and their dignity intact. The curtain rises again, and you step into the realm of social etiquette and audience reactions to stage farts in Elizabethan theater. You sense the crowd's anticipation mingled with an unspoken question. What happens when nature interrupts art? Elizabethan audiences were a lively bunch. Theater was often rowdy, a social event where heckling, laughter, and even mild chaos were part of the experience. You can almost hear the chatter, the clinking of tankards, and the rustle of cloaks settling as people prepare for a night of entertainment. But how did these audiences respond when an actor's flatulence escaped control? Surprisingly, many patrons reacted with humor or understanding rather than scandalized shock. You picture a clever pun flying from the stage, a quick-witted actor turning a gaseous mishap into a joke that sends the crowd into peals of laughter. The Elizabethan love for body humor means that even an unplanned sound could become part of the show. One story recalls an actor who deliberately timed a well-placed accidental noise to punctuate a particularly dull scene, drawing appreciative chuckles. You imagine the mischievous grin behind the carefully practiced exterior. Historians still argue whether such incidents were truly embraced or quietly ignored by more refined members of the audience. Some scholars suggest that the range of reactions depended heavily on the venue, social class of the crowd, and the nature of the play. In the crowded, often rowdy pit, a noisy slip might be met with cheers and applause, while in the more expensive galleries, it might be discreetly overlooked or swiftly hushed. You also consider the role of the gobo, the stage prompter, who sometimes had the delicate task of smoothing over moments that didn't go according to plan, including bodily interruptions. Their quick thinking could turn a potentially embarrassing moment into a seamless part of the narrative flow. Backstage, actors would share stories of audience reactions, often laughing over the memories and vowing to be better prepared next time. Interestingly, some playwrights seemed aware of these possibilities, embedding subtle references to bodily functions in their scripts, perhaps as a way to normalize and diffuse the awkwardness. The communal atmosphere of Elizabethan theater, where performers and audience were physically close and socially intertwined, created a unique space where imperfection was not only tolerated, but sometimes celebrated. You reflect on this earthy acceptance, a far cry from modern theaters where silence is golden and any noise is a potential scandal. It's a reminder that laughter and shared humanity were always at the heart of performance, a gentle balm for the unpredictabilities of live theater. The echoes of applause fade, and you settle into improvisation and recovery. How actors covered stage gas mishaps. In this moment, you enter the quicksilver world of quick thinking and backstage camaraderie, where mistakes become chances to shine. Imagine yourself mid-performance. The unexpected sound slips out. What now? Elizabethan actors, trained in sharp wit and agility, had to turn these moments into gold. You picture the immediate mental gymnastics. A quip here, a sidestep there, a subtle gesture that blends accident into art. One common technique was the double take. The actor would glance at a fellow player, feigning surprise or mock horror, prompting laughter that shifted the audience's attention. You can almost see the exchange, like a silent conversation full of knowing smiles and whispered cues. Historians still argue whether improvisation in these moments was spontaneous or rehearsed. Some evidence suggests troops had emergency lines and practiced fallback jokes for just such occasions. Sometimes, actors employed physical comedy, a quick stumble or exaggerated gesture, to distract and amuse, transforming the mishap into a deliberate part of the performance. You imagine the delicate balance required to keep character integrity while slyly acknowledging the hiccup. Too much attention and the illusion shatters. Too little, and the audience might miss the joke. Backstage, these skills were honed over many rehearsals, with older actors mentoring younger ones in the fine art of saving face. Literally. Interestingly, some playwrights even built flexibility into their scripts, allowing for ad-libbed lines or comedic interludes that actors could call on when needed. You also consider the role of the audience here. Their readiness to play along often determined how smoothly a recovery went. The bond between troupe and crowd was a delicate dance of trust and shared amusement, creating a forgiving environment for those all-too-human moments. In this way, every stage fart was not just a potential embarrassment, but also an opportunity for connection and laughter. You picture the relief and triumph felt when a well-timed improvisation turns a slip into a highlight of the night. It's a testament to the resilience and creativity that defined Elizabethan theater, where even the unexpected became part of the magic. You drift now into the final stretch, exploring legacy and lessons, what stage farts teach about Elizabethan theater's humanity. The theater of centuries ago feels closer, more alive, and oddly comforting as you reflect on how even small bodily mishaps shaped its history. In this moment, you think about how the presence of stage farts, so mundane yet so revealing, pulls back the velvet curtain on Elizabethan actors not as untouchable artists, but as real people with very human quirks. It's easy to imagine the actors, beneath the elaborate costumes and dramatic makeup, nervously hoping their natural bodily rhythms don't betray them in front of the crowd. Historians still argue whether the acknowledgement of these little imperfections helped democratize theater, making performances more approachable and relatable to audiences across social classes. You imagine that it must have been reassuring to know that the voices and gestures on stage belonged to people who could laugh at themselves. You recall the myriad ways actors prepared, coped, and even embraced these bodily realities, from diet and discreet relief spots backstage to improvisation and humor, to a culture that allowed a bit of body laughter without harsh judgment. In many ways, stage farts were woven into the fabric of the Elizabethan theater experience, not as taboo embarrassments, but as gentle reminders of the shared humanity between performers and audience. The lessons ripple forward. Today's actors, despite technological advances and heightened expectations of perfection, still face the unpredictability of live performance. Only now, a cough or a dropped line replaces the accidental noise. You imagine the soft glow of candlelight illuminating a small Elizabethan playhouse, the smell of wood and damp earth, the whispered anticipation of the crowd, and somewhere in the mix, the quiet, almost tender acceptance of the small slips that make the night unforgettable. So, as you settle deeper into this story, perhaps you feel a subtle kinship with those who lived so long ago, who faced their fears and flatulence alike, finding humor and grace in every moment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world of Elizabethan theater is not just history. It's a living, breathing reminder that imperfection can be beautiful. As your eyelids grow heavy and the rhythm of the tale slows, let your mind drift with the gentle stories of actors past, whose lives were stitched with humor, resilience, and a touch of human fallibility. The stage, with all its flickering candlelight and whispered scripts, becomes a quiet sanctuary, where even the softest, most unexpected sounds find their place. Feel the warmth of shared laughter, the comfort of knowing that those who entertained centuries ago were not so different from you. Their worries, their jokes, their very human moments linger softly in the air, inviting you to rest in their company. Let the gentle hum of this story soothe you, the images fading into a calm, peaceful night. Tomorrow will bring new tales and fresh journeys, but for now, surrender to the quiet grace of the past, held in a tender embrace of understanding. Sleep well, wrapped in the soft cloak of history's gentle humor, and dream of stages lit by candlelight, filled with warmth, laughter, and the comforting sound of human imperfection. End of script. Sweet dreams.